Do you remember those ridiculous things you could only experience in the 1980s? The ones so funny they still make you laugh today? These moments filled malls, living rooms, and schoolyards with a mix of humor, excess, and everyday weirdness. Looking back now, were they pure fun or pure chaos? If you grew up in the 1980s, you probably remember the sacred ritual of pulling a Nintendo cartridge out of the console, taking a deep breath, and blowing into it like you were reviving an old harmonica. Everyone did it, and everyone swore it worked. The belief was universal. If Mario was glitching, if Zelda would not load, if Duck Hunt froze, the magic fix was to blow the dust away. The truth? It rarely did anything. Sometimes the game worked after, sometimes it did not. But the act itself felt like power in your hands. Kids believed they were engineers, fixing their systems with lung power alone. Friends traded advice, long, slow blows, short, sharp bursts, even warming the cartridge with your breath like it was a frozen lock. Parents rolled their eyes, but they could not argue with the results, however inconsistent. For kids, it was not just a hack, it was a ritual, almost a superstition. Even years later, many adults still catch themselves reaching for an old cartridge and instinctively giving it a puff before sliding it in. Science later explained that moisture from breath could actually make the contacts worse, but nobody cared. Blowing into a cartridge is one of those things that defined the 1980s, a funny, shared illusion that made kids feel like they had control over technology. Do you remember the dramatic pause, the blow, and the hopeful click of the game sliding back in? Before streaming, before DVDs, there was the weekend pilgrimage to the video rental store. Families wandered the aisles, staring at colorful VHS boxes, debating for what felt like hours over which movie would earn the one-night slot. Finally, a tape was chosen, carried home in a bulky plastic case, ready for popcorn and living room magic. The catch came the next day, returning it. If you forgot to rewind, the store clerk would sigh, roll their eyes, or even charge a rewind fee, parents muttered in embarrassment, while kids pretended not to notice. Be kind, rewind became less a slogan and more a commandment of 1980s life. The tape itself was clunky, with fuzzy tracking lines and the occasional stretch of muffled sound. Still, it felt like luxury to watch a movie on demand, even if demand meant you had to bike back the next morning to drop it off. The real stress? Hoping the movie you wanted had not already been rented out. Popular titles had long waiting lists, and kids would beg clerks to check the return bin just in case. A victory meant sprinting home with a smile and rewinding carefully to avoid disaster. Looking back, the whole system feels hilariously outdated, but for families in the 1980s, renting VHS tapes was an event. Do you remember that sinking feeling when you realized you had left the movie at home, still sitting in the VCR? Nothing says 1980s like a teenager strutting down the street with a boombox balanced on their shoulder, blasting music for the whole block. Portable in name only, these stereos were massive, with giant speakers, cassette decks, and enough buttons to feel like piloting a spaceship. They ran on batteries, 8 to 12 of them, that drained faster than a flashlight at summer camp. Yet the boombox was a badge of pride. Kids lugged them to basketball courts, beaches, and schoolyards, setting the soundtrack for every hangout. Songs became public property, your mixtape blaring out for strangers and friends alike. Parents complained about the noise, but secretly marveled at the sheer audacity of turning a personal playlist into a community event. The shoulder carry itself was an art form. Too low and it slipped, too high and you looked awkward. The real pros strutted with confidence, head bobbing, volume at maximum. The music was not just background, it was identity, broadcast as loudly as the speakers allowed. Of course, the weight was ridiculous. After a few blocks, shoulders ached, backs tensed, and batteries sputtered. Still, nobody cared. For one shining decade, boomboxes turned sidewalks into stages and kids into DJs. Today, wireless earbuds keep music private, but back then, the louder the better. Do you remember hearing "Eye of the Tiger" or "Beat It" from half a mile away before spotting the kid carrying his stereo kingdom? In the 1980s, Hair was not just a style, it was architecture. Bangs soared into the air, shellacked in place with layers upon layers of aquanet. Bathrooms filled with the choking haze of aerosol as teens sprayed, teased, and sprayed again, determined to create skyscrapers out of strands. The bigger, the better. Girls competed over height. Boys tried mullet variations, and mirrors fogged with the effort of construction. By the time they finished, their bangs were less hair and more sculpture. Hard, sticky, and completely immovable in the face of wind, rain, or basic logic. Parents groaned at the cost of hairspray, while schools practically invented new fire codes around it. Still, nobody dared to touch the style. It was untouchable both literally and socially. To flatten your bangs was to surrender your 1980s credibility. Of course, the side effects were absurd. Hairbrushes gummed up, pillowcases stuck, and the ozone layer never forgave us. But for one brief, glorious era, hair was an act of rebellion, and comedy rolled into one. Today, the photos inspire laughter and disbelief. But for those who lived it, hairsprayed bangs were a badge of honor. Do you remember ducking into the bathroom between classes to give your bangs one more defiant spray? When MTV launched in 1981, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Imagine a channel that played music videos around the clock, complete with wild VJs introducing the latest hits. Kids rushed home from school, flipping it on before homework, desperate not to miss the world premiere of their favorite band's newest video. The videos themselves were groundbreaking. Suddenly, music was not just something you heard, it was something you saw. Artists crafted mini-movies with flashy visuals, dramatic storylines, and choreography that instantly shaped culture. Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Duran Duran were not just voices anymore. They were images burned into living room screens. Friends compared notes the next day, reenacting dance moves in hallways or doodling band logos on their binders. The influence was massive. Fashion, slang, and even haircuts came straight from the glowing box in the corner of the room. Of course, the funny part now is that MTV eventually drifted away from its music roots, leaving later generations puzzled. But for kids in the 1980s, it was an addiction, a cultural pulse you could not miss. Today, YouTube serves the same purpose, but nothing matches the thrill of rushing to the couch and seeing your favorite band explode onto the screen for the very first time. Do you remember the excitement of an MTV countdown waiting for that one video everyone was talking about? The Rubik's Cube stormed into the 1980s like a colorful hurricane. This little plastic puzzle promised endless entertainment. Just twist, turn, and match the colors. Simple in theory, maddening in practice. Millions bought them, and millions gave up after a week. Coffee tables across America became graveyards for half-solved cubes. Kids tried, parents tried, even grandparents tried, only to stare in frustration at a stubborn square that refused to align. Some cheated by peeling off stickers, others by forcing the cube apart and snapping it back together. The satisfaction was short-lived, but the bragging rights lasted forever. Schools saw Rubik's Cubes pop up in hallways, with kids racing against timers or showing off their two sides solved, like it was an Olympic medal. Competitions sprang up, and soon speed cubers turned the fad into a skill. But for most, the cube was destined to gather dust. The bright side? Even unsolved, the Rubik's Cube became decor, a permanent fixture on shelves, signaling you had at least attempted greatness. Today, speed cubing is serious business, but back then, the craze was about comedy as much as competition. Do you remember twisting furiously, convinced that if you tried just one more move, the cube would finally surrender? Step into any mall in the 1980s, and you were guaranteed to hear the electronic symphony of the arcade. Pac-Man gobbling pellets, Galaga blasting aliens, pinballs clattering against bumpers. The air buzzed with neon lights and endless noise. Kids showed up with buckets of quarters, ready to wage war against machines that ate allowance money as fast as they ate ghosts. Arcade marathons were not just games. They were battles of endurance. Thumbs blistered, backs hunched, and eyes glazed as kids played for hours, determined to get their initials on the high-score screen. Crowds gathered to cheer, offering tips or jeering when someone lost a life. Parents groaned at the money vanishing into slots, but for kids, it was worth every coin. The arcade was freedom, competition, and comedy rolled into one. Friends argued over who was best, rivalries formed, and every victory carried the weight of a championship. Of course, the machines were merciless. A single mistake and your quarter was gone, swallowed forever. Still, kids came back, convinced that this time they would make it further, faster, higher. Today, arcades have mostly faded, but the memory of clinking coins and glowing screens lives on. Do you remember the pride of seeing your initials flash across the screen, proof you had conquered the machine? For kids in the 1980s, Saturday mornings were sacred. You woke up early, grabbed the remote, and poured yourself a mountain of sugary cereal, ready to spend hours glued to the screen. Cartoons like He-Man, Transformers, and Smurfs turned living rooms into kingdoms of color and chaos. The cereal was half the fun. Neon marshmallows, chocolate puffs, fruit-shaped loops. Every bite felt like dessert disguised as breakfast. Kids shoveled spoonfuls into their mouths, milk turning into a rainbow swamp at the bottom of the bowl. Commercials for toys and even more cereal filled the gaps, creating a feedback loop of sugar and marketing genius. Parents let it slide, happy for a few hours of peace. They knew the crash would come later, when kids bounced off walls and then collapsed in sugar comas. But in the moment, Saturday mornings were pure joy. Cartoons blaring, bowls clinking, and kids laughing with milk mustaches. Looking back, it feels absurd that sugar bombs passed as breakfast, but nobody cared. The combination of cartoons and cereal was unstoppable, a ritual that every 1980s kid remembers. Today, streaming lets kids watch anytime, but nothing matches the magic of Saturday mornings. Do you remember rushing to the kitchen, cereal box in hand, afraid you'd miss the opening theme of your favorite show? In the 1980s, nothing caused more schoolyard envy than the Trapper Keeper. These colorful binders with Velcro flaps and sliding pockets turned organization into a fashion statement. Kids compared designs like car enthusiasts comparing engines, rainbows, geometric patterns, cartoon characters, all screaming personality. Opening a Trapper Keeper was theater. The loud rip of Velcro, the click of rings, the sliding of pockets, it was school supply as performance art. Friends huddled around, checking out the newest designs, while jealous classmates plotted to convince their parents to buy one too. Of course, the wars came quickly. Whose Trapper Keeper was cooler? Who had the newest release? Who could slam theirs shut the loudest? The debates raged like courtroom battles, with kids defending their binders as if they were prized possessions. Teachers rolled their eyes, annoyed at the distraction. But for kids, the Trapper Keeper was more than paper and plastic. It was identity. Losing one felt like a tragedy. Gaining one felt like victory. Today, they survive as nostalgia bait. But in the 1980s, Trapper Keepers ruled schools. Do you remember slamming yours shut, grinning as the Velcro echoed through the classroom? Sticker collections were an obsession in the 1980s, but Scratch and Sniff took it to another level. Kids hoarded them in binders, trading them like baseball cards, showing them off during recess with the seriousness of jewel appraisers. The scents ranged from delightful, pizza, bubblegum, strawberries, to bizarre, gasoline, skunk, even dirt. Scratching the sticker released a puff of artificial aroma that somehow felt magical. Kids pressed noses to paper, giggling at the smells, daring each other to sniff the gross ones. The weirdest stickers often became the most prized, proof you had something rare and outrageous in your collection. Parents shook their heads at the nonsense, but for kids, it was serious business. A thick binder of Scratch and Sniff stickers meant status, bragging rights, and endless entertainment. Some even claimed sniffing them made homework less boring, though teachers disagreed. Of course, the scents faded over time, leaving just sticky patches of paper. But the memory of scratching, sniffing, and laughing remains. Today, Scratch and Sniff survives in novelty form, but in the 1980s, it was king of the playground. Do you remember opening your binder and proudly declaring, "This one smells like pizza," to an awed audience? In the 1980s, Garbage Pail Kids cards became the ultimate rebellion in pocket-sized form. They were grotesque, hilarious, and irresistible, parodying the sweet-faced Cabbage Patch craze with oozing, puking, and exploding cartoon children. The artwork was so disgusting it became funny, and kids could not get enough. Trading them at school was a black market operation. You slipped cards across desks, swapped them under lunch tables, and bragged about pulling the rarest or grossest one in a fresh pack. Teachers hated them, parents were horrified, and principals banned them outright, which only made kids want them more. The cards were sticky, cheap, and often left gum residue on your fingers, but they were gold to collectors. Friendships were built or broken on whether you had a good pull, and recess often looked like a trading floor of giggling kids showing off vomit-themed art. Looking back, it is absurd that such revolting images were once prized possessions. But in the 1980s, the grosser the card, the greater the glory. Do you remember hiding your Garbage Pail Kids collection from your parents, certain they would throw it out if they found it? Friendship pins were one of the simplest yet most beloved fads of the 1980s. Armed with cheap beads and safety pins, kids would craft miniature works of art and trade them like currency. They clipped them to shoelaces, backpacks, and jackets until they jingled with a rainbow of tiny pins. The more you had, the cooler you were. Sneakers covered in pins meant you had friends, creativity, and maybe even a little style. Some kids competed to make the most elaborate patterns, while others simply swapped them for the sake of feeling included. Parents loved them because they were cheap and harmless, though stepping on one was a hazard nobody forgot. Teachers rolled their eyes at the clinking noises echoing in classrooms, but they secretly admired the patience it took to thread beads onto such tiny pins. Today, the idea seems laughably small compared to the gadgets kids brag about now, but in the 1980s, a beaded pin was a badge of honor. Do you remember the pride of lacing up your sneakers in the morning and hearing the little clink of friendship pins with every step? In the 1980s, no accessory screamed louder than the plastic charm necklace. These oversized chains clattered and squeaked with dozens of colorful charms dangling from every link. Tiny hair dryers, roller skates, animals, and random objects that made no sense. The goal was not subtlety, but excess. Kids swapped charms at recess, begged parents for quarters at vending machines, and built collections big enough to weigh down their necks. The more charms, the better. Layers of neon plastic banging together as kids strutted through hallways. The charms broke constantly, snapped off, or cracked under the slightest pressure, but nobody cared. The sound alone was part of the fun, a constant rattle that announced your arrival long before you entered a room. Looking back, they were cheap junk, but at the time they were priceless. Every charm felt like a memory, every necklace a clunky scrapbook of childhood. Do you remember trying to sleep with one on, only to wake up tangled in a neon mess? By the late 1980s, Lisa Frank designs invaded every classroom. Folders, binders, pencil cases, and notebooks exploded in neon colors, covered with smiling dolphins, rainbow leopards, and unicorns that looked like they had stepped out of a sugar rush. For kids, it was impossible to ignore. Owning Lisa Frank supplies was like carrying artwork to class. Kids flaunted their designs, trading folders and comparing which animals were coolest. Teachers shook their heads at the distracting rainbows, but even they had to admit the colors were mesmerizing. The quality was flimsy, the folders bent, the binders ripped, but the artwork was what mattered. Each new design felt like a status symbol, proof that your school supplies were brighter and happier than anyone else's. Today, Lisa Frank has made a nostalgic comeback, but nothing compares to the 1980s craze. Do you remember opening your backpack to a neon jungle of rainbow animals smiling back at you? Pez dispensers started as simple candy toys, but by the 1980s they had morphed into full-blown collectibles. Kids loved flipping the heads back to reveal the tiny pastel candies, but adults began hoarding them too, chasing after rare designs and turning a goofy toy into serious business. Characters range from superheroes to cartoon icons, each one with its own clunky plastic head. Kids compared dispensers at recess, traded them like baseball cards and stuffed pockets full of chalky candy that never tasted as good as it looked. The dispensers broke easily, and the candy often turned into sticky powder, but the fun was in the ritual. Flipping open Mickey Mouse's head for a sugar fix felt like magic, even when the candy disappointed. Today, Pez collectors still pay big money for rare designs, but for kids in the 1980s, they were cheap fun. Do you remember carrying one in your pocket, showing it off long after the candy was gone? The 1980s were not about subtlety. They were about blinding neon. Hot pink, electric green, screaming yellow, and radioactive orange covered every inch of fashion. Socks, leg warmers, shoelaces, and headbands glowed so brightly they could double as traffic signals. Kids strutted into school looking like human highlighters. The brighter the outfit, the cooler you were. Mixing clashing colors was not a mistake. It was the style. Entire outfits burned retinas, but also created an energy no muted shade could match. Parents groaned about laundry turning into rainbow piles, while teachers winced at classrooms full of glowing outfits. But for kids, neon was confidence, comedy, and fashion rolled into one. Looking back, it is funny that people voluntarily dressed like flashing billboards. Do you remember pulling on neon socks and thinking you were the coolest kid alive? Roller rinks in the 1980s glowed like galaxies, and glow-in-the-dark accessories fit right in. Kids tied neon shoelaces and slipped on plastic bracelets that shone under black lights, turning every spin around the rink into a light show. The problem? Outside the rink, they made you a walking target. Glow-in-the-dark laces were hilarious on the playground, but terrible when you tried sneaking anywhere after dark. Parents scolded, teachers confiscated, but kids kept wearing them anyway. The glow never lasted long, fading after a few spins or washes, but for that brief moment, you looked like you were straight out of a music video. Looking back, they were cheap and impractical, but they felt magical. Do you remember watching your shoes glow as you skated, pretending you were in your own 1980s commercial? In the 1980s, sunglasses were not about protecting your eyes. They were about looking ridiculous. Kids and teens wore novelty frames shaped like hearts, stars, and neon shutters that blocked more vision than sunlight. Seeing where you were going was optional, looking cool was mandatory. Worn at beaches, malls, and roller rinks, these sunglasses became more comedy than accessory. Kids tripped, bumped into things, and tilted their heads constantly just to see. But the laughs and attention made it worth every stumble. The glasses snapped easily, lenses popped out, and the frames cracked, but nobody cared. For a few days, you were the star of your own neon movie. Looking back, it is absurd that anyone thought they were practical. Do you remember squinting through slits, convinced your shutter shades made you untouchably cool? In the late 1980s, inflatable chairs and couches promised futuristic style for teen bedrooms. They were clear, neon, and squeaky, instantly transforming a room into what looked like a sci-fi set. Every teen wanted one, and every parent regretted buying one. The truth hit quickly. They deflated overnight, squeaked every time you moved, and stuck to bare skin like glue. Friends laughed as they slid right off, and eventually the furniture ended up folded in closets, abandoned but not forgotten. Despite the disappointment, they felt like a rite of passage, your first attempt at decorating with something grown up. Looking back, inflatable furniture was the perfect example of 1980s style over function. Do you remember sitting on one, only to sink to the floor within minutes? No 1980s party was complete without someone snapping Polaroid pictures. The instant gratification of shaking a photo and watching it slowly appear was pure magic, even if half the shots came out blurry, dark, or oddly framed. Kids grabbed the camera, wasting film on silly faces and group shots. Parents guarded the film packs like treasure, grumbling at the cost but still snapping away. Within minutes, photos were passed around, waved in the air, and pinned on walls. The quality was terrible compared to today's cameras, but the fun was unmatched. Each photo felt like a keepsake, flaws and all. Looking back, Polaroids were more about the memory than the picture. Do you remember waiting impatiently for the image to appear, shaking it like that would make it faster. In the 1980s, the ultimate treasure was a mixtape carefully recorded off the radio. You sat by your boombox, fingers hovering over the record button, waiting for your favorite song to come on. The thrill came with the frustration. DJs always talked over the first few seconds. You held your breath, praying the station would not fade out or cut to static halfway through the chorus. Sometimes a sibling barged in, yelling in the background, their voice permanently etched onto your perfect mix. Other times, the tape ran out right before the big finale, leaving you with a painful silence. The rewind and fast-forward buttons were worn smooth from constant adjustments. Each mixtape became a time capsule, marked by those tiny imperfections that made them yours alone. You got stuck with half a weather report or a random ad cut into the middle of your track, but you kept it anyway. Each tape was a personal playlist, stitched together with patience and hope. Songs faded into each other unevenly, but to you, it was perfect. Friends traded mixtapes like love letters, each one showing effort and taste. You knew someone cared if they gave you one packed with the best hits. Today, playlists are instant and flawless, but they lack that raw, funny imperfection. Do you remember hitting record at the wrong time and still listening to the tape until it wore thin? Not every 1980s kid had a pool, but nearly every kid had a sprinkler. Parents dragged a hose across the lawn, and suddenly the backyard became a water park. Kids squealed as icy spray smacked their faces, soaking clothes that clung in the sun. Sometimes the sprinkler spun in crazy directions, soaking parents who tried to stay dry on lawn chairs. Dogs barked and chased the spray, leaping through it as much as the kids did. The grass turned muddy, and bare feet tracked messes into the house, earning scolding from tired parents. Yet nobody minded because laughter drowned out the complaints. Those plastic sprinkler heads became the centerpiece of every summer afternoon. The sprinkler always wobbled, sputtered, or got clogged with grass, but that was part of the fun. You darted in and out, daring each other to run straight through. The cold shock felt like a challenge every single time. Sometimes parents joined in, laughing as they accidentally walked too close and got sprayed. Other times, kids lined up buckets and slip-slid across muddy grass until they were caked in dirt. Looking back, it was simple, chaotic, and unforgettable. Do you remember the rainbow in the water spray, dancing as you sprinted barefoot through the grass? Before cordless phones, the 1980s had the endless cord era. Families bought phones with 20-foot coiled cords, stretching them down hallways, around corners, and under doors for a sliver of privacy. The cords tangled instantly, a knotted snake of frustration. Every family had a cord corner, where the plastic insulation wore down from dragging across walls. Kids twisted the cord around their fingers during long calls until circulation cut off. Sometimes the whole phone tipped off the counter, clattering to the floor as the cord yanked it down. Friends giggled when they heard siblings yelling in the background, proof that privacy was never real. The cord itself became as much a part of the memory as the conversation. Teenagers wrapped themselves around door frames, whispering secrets while the phone stretched to its limit. Parents yelled about tripping hazards, and siblings picked up the other receiver to listen in. Entire arguments started over who got phone time. The cords twisted tighter the more you used them, until they curled into a ball that dragged the receiver off the hook. Still, nobody complained too much. Being able to talk and move at the same time felt like freedom. Today, phones are wireless, sleek, and silent, but they lack that loud clunk of a plastic receiver smacking into its cradle. Do you remember pulling the cord so tight you thought it might snap just to keep talking? In the 1980s, every kid's identity was stamped on a metal lunchbox. Whether it was Star Wars, He-Man, or Rainbow Bright, the box clattered through hallways, dented and scraped from years of use. They were heavy, awkward, and often smelled faintly of peanut butter. The designs wore down, but you still carried them proudly, showing loyalty to your favorite characters. The matching thermos rattled like a drum, no matter what it held inside. Sometimes the lid leaked, turning sandwiches into a soggy mess, but you ate it anyway. Friends compared whose box looked the coolest, starting lunchtime debates that felt like battles. That clang of metal against the cafeteria table announced your arrival like a theme song. Opening one was a daily ritual. You flipped the metal clasp with a satisfying snap, hoping for something better than a soggy sandwich. Thermoses rattled inside, sometimes leaking soup or juice all over your snacks. The boxes dented easily and the paint chipped off, but they were badges of pride. Friends compared theirs at lunch tables like trophies, each one a walking advertisement for their favorite shows. Plastic lunchboxes would come later, but nothing replaced the clang of metal against desks. Do you remember slamming yours shut, the echo carrying across the cafeteria like a victory bell? In the 1980s, Atari ruled living rooms, and every kid bragged about beating their favorite game. The funny part? Most Atari games had no real ending. You just racked up points until the screen glitched or you lost patience. Kids invented their own endings, declaring victory when they passed a friend's high score. Neighborhood legends grew around whoever stayed up late enough to push a game to its limits. Controllers were stiff, but you mashed the joystick like it was magic. Every new high score was proof you were king of the block. Even when the screen looped endlessly, kids celebrated like they had unlocked a secret level. Still, kids strutted into school claiming victory over Pitfall or Space Invaders. Nobody questioned it. There was no internet to fact-check, and your word was as good as proof. Playground debates raged over who had the highest score or who finished a game that technically never ended. Controllers were stiff, graphics were crude, and games looped endlessly. But the imagination made up for it. Kids believed they had achieved greatness, even if all they did was last longer than their friend. Today, games have cinematic finales and endless online bragging rights. Do you remember proudly declaring you beat a game, even as the screen kept looping the same level forever? Skiing was never the same once neon showed up. I am talking full spectrum, retina-searing neon, electric pink, screaming lime green, safety cone orange, sometimes all at once. You were not skiing. You were glowing. The 1980s fashion scene decided subtlety was canceled, and nowhere was that more obvious than on the slopes. It was like someone dared the ski community to look like walking glow sticks, and they all said, "Challenge accepted." Ski suits looked like outer space met a Lisa Frank notebook. But here is the thing. When the snow settled, all that color had nowhere to go. Once the decade ended, people looked at their slope selfies and realized they had been dressing like traffic signs. Neon was everywhere for a hot minute. Even the zippers had attitude. And if you were not blinded by your jacket, then someone else's was probably reflecting directly into your eyes. That was not just fashion, it was a safety hazard. But at least you had room to move, right? Speaking of movement, the next 1980s trend thought bouncing was the future of fitness and fun, and totally not sprained ankles. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity almost overnight. They were simple, a metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Pop-Tarts were the answer to a morning dream. Breakfast that popped out of the toaster, ready in minutes, no dishes required. When Kellogg's introduced them in 1964, they were a marvel of modern convenience. frosted or unfrosted rectangles filled with fruit or what tasted like fruit, wrapped in pastry, packed in foil, and ready to heat. They hit shelves just as the pace of American life was speeding up. Moms needed fast. Kids wanted sweet. Pop-Tarts delivered both. Whether it was strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, or wild blueberry, every box felt like a little promise that mornings could be easier. Even cold, straight from the foil, they were a hit in lunchboxes and after-school snacks. No plate? No problem. The smell of a warm Pop-Tart coming out of the toaster was almost as good as the taste. Crispy edge, gooey middle, and just enough frosting to feel like a treat. By the end of the 1960s, Pop-Tarts had become more than a convenience food. They were a cultural touchstone, turning rushed mornings into something fun. And while they've changed flavors and designs over the years, those early Pop-Tarts hold a place in memory like few other foods do. They were not just about food storage. Tupperware parties were secret engines of community, commerce, and independence, especially for women in the 1970s. Step into a neighbor's home and you would see it. The pastel plastics lined up like soldiers, the promise of freshness sealed with a pop. But underneath the lids and labels was something deeper. These gatherings gave stay-at-home mothers a way to feel powerful. Selling meant earnings. Hosting meant purpose. Every product pitch was also a performance, a chance to shine in a world that often ignored domestic labor. Laughter echoed through kitchens. Stories were swapped between sales, and orders were written down with practiced excitement. Kids would peek around corners wondering why grown-ups were having so much fun over containers. It felt like a club, part practical, part glamorous. The catalog was a symbol of what your kitchen could be, how your life could be more organized, cleaner, even happier. For women who were told their value came from homemaking, these parties offered a small rebellion. You could make money. You could lead. You could do it all without leaving the house. And when the guests left with their bags of burping bowls and butter trays, it felt like more than shopping. It felt like success. These parties faded with time, replaced by online orders and supermarket shelves. But for one glittering decade, plastic containers were the foundation of something much bigger than leftovers. You were not just writing letters in the 1980s. You were sending sensory experiences. Perfumed stationery sets were the peak of pen pal drama. Heart-shaped pages with lace borders, sparkly envelopes, and enough floral scent to knock out a small room. There were sets that smelled like roses, vanilla, ocean breeze, or something suspiciously like bubblegum and detergent. You would open a note from your best friend and nearly pass out from the aroma. It was like the page had bathed in perfume and never toweled off. They were beautiful, romantic, and borderline unreadable. The ink would smudge from the coated paper. The scent would linger for days. And if you tried mailing one of these in the heat, good luck. The envelope might as well have been dipped in cologne. Still, it was all part of the charm. These notes were not meant to last forever. They were moments frozen in scent. They smelled like crushes and sleepovers and secrets told in cursive. But not all nostalgia smells sweet. Because the next 1980s trend? It came with a can of hairspray, a comb, and enough height to qualify as a fire hazard. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special. But for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Hot Wheels did not just roll, they roared. When Mattel launched the line in 1968, it changed the way kids thought about toy cars. These were not slow, blocky replicas. Hot Wheels were sleek, bright, and built to race. The original 16 models included muscle cars, hot rods, and custom builds with names like Beatnik Bandit and Diora. They had real speed thanks to low-friction wheels and metal axles. But the real magic came when you laid down that iconic orange track. Loops, curves, jumps. Suddenly, your hallway became Daytona. Kids spent hours building elaborate courses from couches to floorboards to staircases. Some cars went so fast they hit the baseboard and flipped into the next room. The cars were pocket-sized, but they carried the weight of imagination. Each new release felt like a discovery. Paint jobs were wild, details were sharp. Collectors started forming almost immediately. And while other toy cars looked good sitting still, Hot Wheels looked best in motion, blurring by in a flash of chrome and flame decals. For many, it was not just about racing. It was about building your own world, one piece of orange track at a time. Soul Train was not just a show. It was a revolution in sequins, sunglasses, and rhythm. It came on like a pulse, strong, steady, and impossible to ignore. When the first beats dropped and the Soul Train line formed, you did not just watch, you felt it. Hosted by the iconic Don Cornelius, Soul Train brought black music, dance, and style into the living rooms of every American household. It was bold, it was loud, and it was beautiful. For many kids and teens in the 1970s, it was the first time they saw joy that looked like them reflected on screen. Funk, soul, disco, all of it found a home on that stage, and in turn, in hearts across the country. The dancers moved like they had electricity in their bones, and you wanted to move like that too. You tried, in your living room, hoping no one saw, or maybe hoping everyone did. Soul Train was culture. It gave birth to trends. It dared you to dress with flair, to walk with rhythm, to be unapologetically cool. The show said, "This is who we are," and it said it with pride and funk and freedom. Even if you could not dance, even if you did not understand the lyrics, you understood the feeling. It made you want to live louder. Today, you can find clips online, but you cannot replicate the feeling of watching it live when the whole country held its breath and got down together. Before padded gym floors and TikTok dance tutorials, there was the breakdancing board. It was exactly what it sounds like. A portable, foldable square of cardboard with a brick wall graphic or checkerboard print meant to simulate the streets. Because nothing says urban grit like unfolding a fake alleyway in your suburban driveway. These things were lightweight, glossy, and slid around on every surface. In theory, they let you spin, pop, and lock without bruising your spine on concrete. In reality, they slid out from under you mid-move, causing more scraped elbows than applause. But in the moment, they felt cool. They turned any parking lot into a stage. Throw on some Run DMC, slap that cardboard down, and suddenly you were in it. Never mind that it bent after 2 uses and warped in the rain. You were performing. You were part of something. Until the corner curled up or the board tore in half while trying to nail a backspin. But that was the 80s. Function took a backseat to flair. And speaking of flair, our next trend lets you turn every sweatshirt into a personal fashion statement or a wearable art disaster. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it. But they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. Barrel of Monkeys was proof that the simplest ideas can last the longest. Released in 1965, the game came in a bright plastic barrel filled with plastic monkeys that linked together by their arms. That was it. No batteries, no board, no setup time. Just spill the monkeys and try to link as many as you could without dropping the chain. It was harder than it looked. The curved arms never seemed to hook just right, and one wrong move could send your whole line tumbling. But when you did it, when you made it past 10 or 15 monkeys, it felt like a small miracle. Kids would challenge each other to beat their records, dump and restart over and over, totally absorbed. The monkeys themselves were colorful, cheerful, and perfectly palm-sized. The game traveled well. It lived in car glove boxes, grandma's house drawers, and birthday party goodie bags. Decades later, the design remains almost unchanged, which says something about how right they got it the first time. Before screens took over fidget time, there was just you, a barrel, and 24 tiny monkeys daring you to beat your best. Before trading cards became high-stakes business and digital downloads replaced bubblegum comics, there were Wacky Packages. Small, sticky, and hilarious, these stickers were everything a kid needed to feel like they were part of something clever. They parodied real brands, Cap'n Crud cereal, Crust toothpaste, and poked fun at the everyday items in your kitchen. For children of the 1970s, they were rebellion in cartoon form. You could stick them on lockers, notebooks, lunchboxes, anywhere adults would frown and kids would laugh. It was satire before you even knew the word. You felt in on the joke, like the world was just a little less serious when you had a wacky package in hand. Packs were cheap. The thrill of tearing them open was pure adrenaline. Would you get one you already had? Would you find a rare one? The collecting was addictive, the trading even more so. Schoolyards turned into mini stock exchanges, where one kid's duplicate could be your treasure. Teachers hated them. Parents rolled their eyes, but that just made them cooler. These stickers were the beginning of a lifelong love of irony and humor for many. They taught you to question branding, to laugh at consumerism, that maybe not everything sold to you was sacred, and now, decades later, you can still picture the garish art, the warped logos, and the feeling of being clever, just for laughing at laundry detergent. You knew a kid was cool if their necklace made noise from down the hallway. Enter the plastic charm necklace. These things were a fashion statement and a choking hazard all rolled into one. A long, brightly colored chain that you decked out with dozens of plastic trinkets. Mini roller skates, tiny telephones, hair dryers, soda bottles, and anything else the size of your thumb. The more charms, the better. It was like curating your own loud, clunky resume of childhood interests. Everyone traded them. Everyone bragged about having the rare ones. And of course, the plastic was cheap enough to snap if you breathed on it wrong. Teachers hated them. Parents hated stepping on them. But kids loved how collectible they felt. That is, until the day you leaned over your desk and your entire charm empire dumped itself on the floor like a sad little toy avalanche. Still, for a while, they were the perfect combination of fashion and fun. And speaking of things that looked fun but failed to function properly, do you remember the sweet-smelling school supply that never actually worked? Let us talk about rubber-scented erasers shaped like food. Over-the-top hairdos in the 1980s were less about style and more about spectacle. To get that perfect towering poof or side-swept shell, you needed a can of hairspray in one hand and a teasing comb in the other. Some mornings, the bathroom turned into a construction site. Hair was sprayed, scrunched, fluffed, and frozen into place like a sculpture that dared not move. Mousse was slathered on like sunscreen, followed by heat from a curling iron so hot it could leave permanent dents in your bangs. It was a daily battle between gravity and vanity usually won. The bigger the hair, the closer to cool. Class photos from the decade show clouds of bangs, mile-high ponytails, and helmets of blonde that could survive a wind tunnel. Everyone walked around smelling faintly of aerosol. Some kids were practically flammable, but at the time, it was worth it. You judged your popularity by the size of your bangs. A flat head was social suicide. Looking back now, it seems absurd, but for those who lived it, there was no higher compliment than being told your hair looked totally rad. Corgi toys were more than just cars. They were miniature masterpieces. Introduced by British company Metoy in the late 1950s, they reached peak popularity in the 1960s with American kids who were obsessed with anything fast, shiny, or connected to TV and movie heroes. These die-cast vehicles were small enough to fit in your pocket, but detailed enough to spark hours of imaginative play. Police cars came with real-looking sirens. Race cars had working hoods. And the crown jewel? The James Bond Aston Martin DB5, complete with ejector seat, pop-out machine guns, and a hidden bulletproof shield. For kids growing up in the 1960s, it was the coolest thing you could own. Movie magic shrunk down and placed in your palm. Corgi cars raced across kitchen floors, crashed down backyard driveways, and survived countless shoebox battles. They felt heavier than Hot Wheels, sturdier than Matchbox, and somehow more real. Over time, most got scratched, dented, or lost. But finding one today, even chipped, brings back the joy of flipping it over to read the brand stamp and revving it across a table edge. They were not just toys. They were little slices of the world, only faster. The Brady Bunch was not just a sitcom. It was a mirror held up to a hopeful America, one that wanted to believe that everything broken could be blended. A widow with 3 sons, a widower with 3 daughters. Together, they made a perfect mess of a family. For children of the 1970s, this show was more than after-school television. It was comfort. It was order. It was the dream of getting along even when everything changed. You saw yourself in Jan's jealousy, Greg's swagger, or Cindy's innocence. The shag carpet, the avocado kitchen, the tic-tac-toe lawn, it was all so vivid, it practically lived in your memory. It made divorce and remarriage look easy, even fun. It was not about realism, it was about possibility. The show taught you how to talk through feelings, even if the solutions were wrapped up neatly in 25 minutes. It taught you that families were not defined by blood, but by how hard you were willing to try. You sang along with the theme song like it was scripture. You knew that no matter the problem, school, dating, hair, there was always a resolution. It made growing up feel a little less scary, and when you look back now, maybe it was too perfect. But in a world that often felt messy, the Brady house gave you a place to believe that everything, somehow, could work out. Roller rink socials were where friendships formed, crushes blossomed, and fashion collided with fluorescent lighting. Every weekend, kids flocked to the local rink like it was the hottest club in town. You laced up rental skates that never quite fit, wobbled onto the floor, and tried not to fall in front of your classmates. The music blared, everything from Madonna to Michael Jackson, and the lights spun in pinks, blues, and greens. Couples held hands during the slow skate. Kids showed off their best moves during the speed rounds. And when you got tired, you grabbed a slice of cardboard-flavored pizza or a snow cone that turned your tongue electric blue. The carpet was hideous, the lockers never worked, but the vibe? Unbeatable. Roller rinks were more than entertainment. They were a rite of passage. You had your first dance there, your first bruise, maybe even your first kiss, awkward and giggly behind the concession stand. Parents watched from the sidelines or dropped you off with a reminder to call from the payphone. The rink was loud, sticky, and chaotic, and yet it was magic. Even now, the smell of rental skates and popcorn grease brings it all back in one wheeled rush. Television commercials in the 1960s were more than just breaks between shows. They were cultural events in miniature. With only a few channels and no fast-forward buttons, families watched together as jingles and catchphrases embedded themselves in the national memory. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz. You already know the rest. These ads had staying power. Cereal mascots danced across the screen. Soap commercials turned kitchens into laboratories. And toy ads? They were irresistible. From Slinky to Mr. Potato Head, kids begged for whatever had just aired during Saturday morning cartoons. Commercials were peppy, earnest, and often downright charming. They starred smiling housewives, enthusiastic children, and baritone narrators who made even laundry detergent sound heroic. These were the years when brands did not just sell products. They sold a lifestyle, a vision of modern convenience and happiness. Parents trusted what they saw. Kids repeated the jingles under their breath. Even decades later, people can still sing along to a tune they heard once before dinner in 1966. Commercials from the 1960s did not just advertise. They became part of family rhythm, part of shared language, and part of what made the television glow a little brighter after each show. Charlie's Angels was not just a television show, it was a cultural awakening in bell-bottoms and feathered hair. In an era when women were still fighting for equal footing, this trio of private detectives kicked down the door with high heels and high style. Sabrina, Jill, and Kelly were not sidekicks, they were the stars, and every week, millions tuned in to watch them outsmart villains, fight crime, and still look flawless. It was action, it was glamour, and for a lot of young girls, it was a revelation. These women were strong, smart, dangerous, and they did it all without needing permission. They were not waiting to be rescued. They were the ones doing the rescuing. For boys, it was a crush. For girls, it was a blueprint. Watching them felt like seeing the future, one where women were just as bold and capable as anyone else. Yes, the show was campy. Yes, it leaned hard into style, but underneath the glossy surface was something powerful: representation. Every time the Angels walked into danger with confidence, another crack formed in the glass ceiling. And for the kids growing up in the 1970s, those cracks mattered. They signaled that maybe, just maybe, the world was changing. There are hairstyles, and then there are structural engineering projects. Gravity-defying bangs, held aloft by industrial-strength hairspray, were the crown jewels of 1980s style. We are talking sky-high, shellacked to perfection, immovable bangs that could survive a hurricane. You did not just style your hair, you sculpted it. And the glue that held it all together? A can of Aquanet, the unofficial perfume of the decade. One spritz was never enough. You held that button down until the room filled with fog and your lungs begged for mercy. It was how you knew your bangs were officially done. They had to crunch when you tapped them. These bangs had volume, attitude, and possibly their own zip code. They required teasing, patience, and a total disregard for the ozone layer. Parents disapproved. Schools banned combs in lockers. But if your bangs did not touch the ceiling of your school photo backdrop, were you even living? It was extreme, it was ridiculous, and it was glorious. But eventually, the sky-high trend lost steam, and pastel blazers tried to take over the fashion throne. Spoiler alert, not everyone could pull off Crockett from Miami Vice. Television Guide was the original streaming schedule, printed, folded, and worshipped. Each week, families flipped through its pages to plan their entire viewing life. What time is your show on? What channel is the big movie airing? Without a television guide, you were lost in the static. It listed every program, from early morning cartoons to late-night reruns. You circled shows in pen. You memorized time slots. You argued with siblings over what to watch and when. Sometimes you even set a timer on the VCR to record your favorites, if you could figure out how. Television Guide came with featured articles, behind-the-scenes trivia, and occasionally a glossy cover that made you feel like you were holding something special. It was not just a magazine, it was a map, a lifeline, and a reminder that missing your show meant waiting until summer reruns or, gasp, never seeing it again. Kids today will never understand the pressure of being ready at exactly 7 o'clock, or the heartbreak of flipping the page and realizing your favorite show was preempted by a holiday parade. The Television Guide was small, simple, and essential, and in a world before scrolling, it helped us find our way through the glow of the living room screen. TV dinners turned the living room into a dining room, one foil tray at a time. They were not new in the 1960s, but this was the decade they really took off, just as television became the centerpiece of American family life. You got a little compartment for meatloaf, One for mashed potatoes, another for corn, maybe a brownie tucked into the corner. All you had to do was pop it in the oven, wait, and serve. No planning, no cleanup, no arguing over what to cook. The tray itself felt futuristic. Everything had its place. The food was not gourmet, but it was warm, salty, and comforting in its predictability. Families could eat while watching their favorite shows. Kids could feel like grown-ups with their own personal meal. The appeal was clear, fast, easy, and made to match the rhythm of modern life. TV dinners were more than just food. They were a new way to eat, one that said it was okay to sit on the couch and focus on The Ed Sullivan Show or Bonanza. The clang of a fork against aluminum still echoes in memory. For many, it was the sound of dinner and television becoming one. We just laughed our way through the funniest things you could only experience in the 1980s. So drop a comment with the one you survived, hit like if it brought back memories, and subscribe so we can keep rewinding the past together.